Welcome back to the Fishing Daily Podcast. This is episode 7 of series 4, and in this episode we'll be chatting with Patrick Murphy from the Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation, and he is also the INTO candidate for the European Parliament elections in Southern Ireland. And we'll be talking to him about what's happening in the fishing industry and what he feels he can achieve if he gets elected to the European Parliament. Thank you for joining us today, Patrick.
No, thank you for having me on, Oliver.
Patrick, let's talk about the current situation in the fishing industry. We've had a lot of problems. The solutions that's been given hasn't really resolved anything, has it?
No, absolutely not. Look, we had flotillas up the rivers. We had meetings with our minister, with our department. Things are getting worse rather than better. We have the trouble with the atypical scheme. We've been given an awful lot of promises, just like you see now all the candidates that are running from Europe making promises. I am in the industry representing them. I can tell you they're not delivering any of the promises that they're making. So price of fish has collapsed. This has happened because they're bringing in massive amounts of food into Europe. And sure, why would our prices stay up when there's a cheaper alternative from countries with cheaper wages, cheaper production models, and cheaper payment for their fish? So the market, the Common Market Organization, is not looking after our people. And as a result, our fishing industry is suffering.
An example of our fishing industry suffering is the current situation with the pollock, where targeted pollock fishing has been banned. We're also looking now at crab prices collapsing. There's a whole myriad of things happening that's putting the industry under pressure, and we could see a lot of people dropping out.
Well, we are seeing people dropping out. If you can't make a living and you're spending more money on fuel and bait and gear and going out risking your life to make a living, and you're not even covering your costs, so of course people are going to drop out. That's normal. What I'd ask is this: all the promises that politicians are making, where's the reactions from Board BIA or from BIM to try and bolster the market? Why aren't they putting an immediate advertising campaign together to try and get local people to eat this food? I was on Kerry Radio, Oliver, and they were complaining about the price of crab and that people couldn't afford it, but that meant people wanted to eat the fish. So where's the reaction to what's happening? None. And the industry are not being asked to come into the room to put up solutions or suggestions. We're excluded from the process. And as I said in one of the meetings, we are the experts. If they had to get our knowledge, they wouldn't find a consultant in the country that would be able to compete with us. Yet we're brought in as a stakeholder, give our advice for free, and the consultants then get to write up the report and charge hundreds of thousands. The industry is being let down constantly by everybody on the other side of the table. And it's about time that changed. If you want to change that, change your representation.
And one of these examples, as we were talking about, was the inshore pollock. Is there a safeguard needed and to be put in place?
So my daughter was sitting alongside me and I raised this before anybody else raised it because they didn't get it, right? We had a catch record of over 900 tons, and that was dramatically reduced, right, to just over 58 tons. Like, that's not even 5%. Do you know what I mean? So on a bycatch, I don't know how they did the figures on the bycatch. They more or less focused on the recovery of the stocks. And I said, your figures are completely wrong. If you had that much of a cut across the board, then the stock should rebound in a year. If it isn't rebounding in a year, then there's other contributing factors that isn't the fishermen, and you need to find those out. And I'm delighted to report that at the Marine Institute meeting that we had in Galway in the last couple of days, we've raised this point and we've pointed it out that you have to do a specific targeted survey to understand this. And we need to reach out to the fishermen to go back over their catch records and find out, instead of starting now today and putting a 5-year scientific assessment in place that you'd only get a result in 5 years, we have to look for the landing data and what has been happening in the last 5 years so that we can implement measures now. And as one fisherman at that meeting said, he found a batch of pollock inside in a bay that he hadn't seen them there before, and he caught the quota in one haul, and he wasn't even targeting them as a species. So that gives indications these fish are on the ground, but we need to find a way of getting that into the system so that it reflects in the scientific advice. You won't hear that from anybody else. You'll just hear about people saying what needs to be done. I know what has to be done, and I understand what will be acceptable by ISIS into the process so that it'll be quantitative and acceptable advice, that it can be verified. But again, if I'm not at the table pushing this, then who's going to be there? And this is the problem. And I don't get the airtime, and luckily I do from you, to explain this to people. But like, we have ways and means of targeting this fishery in Europe for saying we had the catch record here. You cannot expect us to go from 100% of our catches down to 5% and say that's a bycatch. That's a nonsense. That doesn't make any sense. And I wanted to look at what the other countries were catching and are they down to 5% of their catches, not of their entitlements, of their catches. Because if you're putting in a bycatch provision, then it should be based on what you're catching, not on your share out under the common fishery policy.
But another quite issue as well is we are seeing changes in our waters. We're seeing different fish stocks. We're seeing fish stocks coming back that hasn't been there for maybe a long time. And these fish, especially like bluefin tuna and that, are having an impact on the likes of smaller fish because they hunt them. Yet no, we have no quota for this, targeted quota for this catch. But we're looking at countries like Iceland that has a targeted quota and they don't fish it because it's not really in their waters. And this is the irony of the situation. We can't get a quota. We need a quota. What can you do about it if you're in Europe?
What I could do about it in Europe is that I would actually challenge the science that's there, and I would go back and look at with ICAT, which I've been asking for, to bring them into the room and evaluate Ireland as a country outside of the current common fishery policy. Why? Because we didn't get the opportunity to claim our track record in the reference years. And if we didn't have our opportunity to claim that, then we were done, is the way I'd suggest it. My understanding is that France got their quota through scientific purposes. So, in other words, they proved that the fish were there. They proved that the fish were eating their stocks, their indigenous species around it, and having an effect on other fishing activities. So they got a quota to control the numbers inside in their waters. Now, I would be looking into this more in Europe rather than anecdotally. And if that is the case, we would be demanding a quota because that is the only way that we're going to get it. Asking, like our minister and the department said, for a quota in bluefin tuna means we have to give up something else. And they alluded that we have such a high share of the mackerel in Europe that that's what would be asked of us. And that's just not right. But then again, I don't know. I'm not at the table. The difference between me and going to Europe than any other MEP is this. This is what I promise. I will do what the other MEPs aren't doing. That's getting involved, being engaged. How do I know they're not doing that? Because I'm there with the last 8 years. We don't see our MEPs. We have to chase them down. They have no interest. Even on the PESH committee, we had an MEP, Grace O'Sullivan. She wanted to reduce the tolerance levels of the bycatch of the mixed stocks. Not mixed stock, but the bycatch of our fishery, so the 10%. They wanted to reduce that to 5 until we challenged it in the Irish South and West over there. And we did, and we won. And the other one then was changing the tax regimes on the fuel. And just to explain, one of the arguments in the advisory councils that I was at, I had to speak to the NGOs and I said, you're wrong in your conception of forcing fishermen to change their engines because the insurance companies already do that. Once your engines reach a certain number of hours on your boat, you won't be insured. You have to change your engine. So if there's a new technology there, surely be to God, it would make more sense for a boat to put in the new engine and the new technology. The reason why they're not doing that is because the technology isn't there. So rising the tax to force somebody to do something that they're already doing is crazy. This comes back to what I'm saying about the MEPs. None of them in their interviews would have a clue of what I'm talking about here because they don't know. So they're making promises that they cannot deliver. They don't understand the system or how to do it. Back to the bluefin tuna. I went to Dubrovnik. I challenged the establishment over there and the people. I had the doorstep inside lifts going up and down to the floors. And that's why we got the scientific quota of 1 ton to be able to do the experiments. And that's the truth. And anybody can dispute that, but I'm telling you that is the truth. For years we were asking for it. We got it the year after I went to Dubrovnik. Let's add up 2 and 2 here and come up with the 4.
Ireland seems to have a history of being knocked around by the European Commission, and we can look at the situation with Norway, get access to blue whiting. We can look at the pressure that to put on Ireland to allow Iceland to get into the Irish EZ for it. There's a whole history there, isn't there?
There is, but like this is before my time in 2014. The deal for Ireland was a bad deal. We shouldn't have agreed to it. When myself, Ian, Brendan got more involved in what was happening, we seen about Norway trying to come inside the 12-degree line, and it was given to them. And this is a fact, and the other two will corroborate this. We were told by the department, but you'll get them landing the fish and you'll save the processors and you'll get fish in there until, of course, the regulatory changes came. And then boats found it virtually impossible to land into Ireland because of the regime that was being imposed on them. But we fought that. We went to Europe and we're continuously going to Europe on regular missions from the industry. Not one MEP came with us with any of those to the commission, but we chased down the MEPs, every one of them, and we had to get them on side so that they put pressure then. But we had to force them to do it because they didn't have a clue. So when people and even non-MEPs are making promises to you, they haven't a clue what they're promising because they don't know. But we've proven by our actions in Europe that Ireland's waters are sovereign. We got that acknowledgement from the Commission. We told them that the Irish people would not stand for another country to be coming up against our shoreline. And following that, Iceland was introduced into the mix. And for people to understand, Europe is out of kilter with every other coastal states negotiating team. We're on our own. We've alienated ourselves from the other groups. The only person willing to talk to us is Iceland. So they want to do a deal with Iceland to strengthen our negotiating position on the coastal states. But look at the price and look who gets what is being offered. It'll be on the same ratio as before. We get 15%, all the other countries get 85% of what's being offered. And we're saying no to that. That fight is still there. And it's a real fight. And if we don't have people in Europe that understand the complexities of the negotiations, you're going to lose out again. And we'll be just talking about this in another 5 years of what went wrong. What went wrong is you didn't send people out to Brussels who understands exactly the complexities of the negotiations and our industry, from the science to the catching sector, to the marine spatial planning, to the complexities of mixed stock catch advice, to the landing obligation. And I've presented out there on this stuff. So I put it here this way. If somebody was picking somebody in the country, the best represent the fishing industry with the knowledge they have outside there, would they pick any of the candidates that are putting themselves forward, or would they pick somebody from the industry that knows this stuff? I mightn't be popular across the board because of my stance of trying to protect all fishermen, and it's not seen as that, but that is the truth. And I'm trying to make sure that as many fishermen get to stay in our industry as possible. I've proven that by bringing flotillas up there, by forcing the government to have task force reviews. I've been accredited for that by politicians, that through my lobbying personally, that these task force came off. I asked Michael Creed for these task force before the Brexit negotiations, and he said no. We were the only organization, as you know, that predicted what was going to get. We were going to get hammered in Brexit, that we were going to get caught between two stools. And that's what happened. We were savaged by the UK and we were savaged by our so-called friends in UMOFA, who turned their backs on us, and we paid the biggest price. I was the only voice in the industry that said this. Sorry, I'll correct that. Joey Myrne as well too in the end said that we were going to be savage. We were going to be eaten by the sheep and by the wolves in sheep's clothing.
That's something that is historical for Ireland, in the fact that, you say would get a small percentage of the blue whiting that was being offered back, and countries like the Netherlands, who's only got a small percentage of waters, gets the lion's share, and it's just a ridiculous situation that has to be reversed.
And you see, when people ask, well, what can you do about it? It's there, it's legal, right? So let's explain this now to anybody that wants to know, right? The United Nations Laws of the Sea gives rights to the countries closest to the resource above all other countries. So if you're the closest to the resource, you get it. It's either called zonal attachment, right?
Yeah.
And it's very simple. If the fish are in your waters, they're there for longer, you get to claim them. If the fish breed and spawn in your waters. This is why Norway and Iceland have claimed unilateral quotas on the mackerel, saying, oh, they're here feeding in our waters, we take them for longer. The EU accepted that when they acknowledged that England were entitled to get their fish back. But what they did was they ignored those rights for Ireland, despite the fact that the common fishery policy was designed to protect three key elements. That is the coastal communities that depend on the fish stocks. That is the stocks themselves and the sustainability of the stocks. And the third pillar is the environment. Now, we all hear that trawling is damaging the environment and we have to restore our oceans. So that means that pillar has failed. We know there are 9 stocks that have zero catch advice, right? That means they have failed in protecting the stocks. That's failed. Now, I don't think there's a man, woman, or child in Ireland wouldn't agree with this one. They have failed Ireland's coastal communities by destroying our offshore fleet in 20 years. We've gone from 400 boats down to less than 140 boats. They have failed. And here's the thing, folks. Built into the common fishery policy is the requirement for a full review of the common fishery policy every 7 years. Nobody is putting these arguments forward from our government or from our ministers or the candidates that are moving forward because they don't understand. And it's simple. If the common fishery policy isn't following its core objectives, then it has to be reviewed. And under that review, it's very simple. The task force report that we presented shows that there are countries in Europe that are not taking their full allotment of fish. They're catching 70 or 75%. And under the common fishery policy, you can only carry forward 10% every year. So that means there's 15% for a lot of the stocks being left uncaught, right? Well, Ireland, under the United Nations laws of the sea, should be putting forward the argument, this is our fish. We need to get this back. And we're entitled to it, and legally entitled to it. But nobody's asking for this. Do you know why? They don't know the law. They don't understand it. And remember, this is a policy. It's not a regulation. It's not even a directive. It's a policy. And if the policy is failing, we are entitled to challenge that as a country being part of it, that the policy isn't working for our people. Why? They're our fish. They're in our waters. We have a right to challenge this. You're not managing it properly. You're destroying our coastal communities. Your management plan has failed. We want it reviewed. And this time we want it reviewed in a fair and transparent manner, right? That goes on the principles that you set out, not on catch records that we don't know were they true or not. We certainly know that there's a lot of people who weren't contacted. We were throwing fish out over the side, right? Back then, my father told me. They weren't accounted for, but they're accounted now under the landing obligation. If you discard fish, they're called discards, they're counted off your catch. All these legal arguments, and they are legal arguments, should be brought to Europe, and we should be challenging for a greater share of our fish and using these arguments to get it. Now, if people believe that I know what I'm talking about, you have the opportunity to back one of your own and vote for Patrick Murphy or into the party I represent.
If we're looking at what the fishing industry has earned since, say, like 2020, it's on a slide. We've less boats, we've less quotas. So in a situation where the boats were earning maybe 400 million, they're going to be down to 200 million or less.
The camera can't show this, but what I'm holding, Oliver, is the stock book, right? The Marine Times stock book from 2019 before we lost all our fish, right? Okay, it's for 2020. And if you give me a minute, I'm going to look up hake, for instance, right? Our share of hake back then is very small. It's only around 5. We had 4,400 tons. I believe our quota now is just over 2,000 tons. We've lost half our fish. Like, that is not sustainable. They're talking about sustainability. How can a country survive on those massive cuts in stocks and be expected to maintain the fleet that are there? And it's our fish when other countries aren't catching their full entitlement. Like, the common fishery policy is not fit for purpose. It needs to be reviewed. I'm just giving one example. I would stay here for the day. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm hoping the people that watch this show and will share this will understand. Genuinely, look at the category of politicians and candidates that are out there. Ask yourself, if you want somebody to represent your industry and the Irish rights on fishing, which could be worth €1 billion in landings a year, which could bring reinvent our industry genuinely right across the board and stop the division. Everybody would have enough fish. But we have to look for that fish in Europe that everybody can have it and tailor make the different sections of the fleet to have enough within them, right? Each one of them to survive and build on it so that we can land fish, we can market it to the utmost, we can really drive this and get our population eating fish again and double it and triple it, just like you said there about the small inshore boats. Everybody loves crab. People will eat it. If you put it on the shelves and give it at a reasonable price, people eat it. So you'll double your market force. It's not rocket science. It's just common sense. If we apply this, but again, if you don't put people in the position to make this happen, then you're not going to see it happen.
Yeah, Patrick, it's a simple situation where we have a government that says our fishing industry isn't worth anything. They say it's not worth fighting for. Yet no, if you look at countries like Norway, they make billions a year. Not saying that we're like Norway making billions, but if you look at our neighbors, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, they make billions out of it every year. And it's an embarrassment to have 12% of the waters, the biggest waters in the EU, and yet no, be the poorest
And
out
I'm
of
going to
it.
make this even worse to what you were saying, Oliver. They're making these billions out of Irish waters.
It's Irish waters, yes.
So they're
Out of
taking
what's
our
out there.
fish.
Yeah.
They value our resource more than our own politicians do. Our politicians have given up, and they will tell you this. This is not me saying it. They'll tell you.
Yeah.
Our minister, our Tánaiste now, when he was Taoiseach, when we met him in December of 2020, himself, Simon Coveney, and our minister was there. And I made a request, and I was shot down straight away. And I asked for our Minister for Foreign Affairs to assist our Minister for Fisheries together to go out to Europe and fight together to be on the one voice in the meetings together. And Simon Coveney told me, "Oh, look, Charlie's a great negotiator, and Charlie's the man to do this and all this." And oh, I couldn't say that. And I'm going, "Of course you can. Set aside the egos. Go out there and fight for us." And instead, after that happening, we had our Taoiseach at the time, Micheál Martin, saying on RTE News, "We are going to look for a temporary solution to help our fishermen until we find a more permanent solution." And they had already decided there and then that the solution was to get rid of fishermen, which was to decommission our fleet. We fought then for money from Europe. We got 1.16 billion, and 60 million of that was put to wipe out a third of our fleet. They valued our fleet at 200 million. So any politician from the political parties that are telling you, "Oh, we're going to represent you," where the hell were they when this was going on? When we were calling out the decommissioning scheme was making victims of victims, where we had people who had boats worth 1.2 million before Brexit and were given 600,000 to scrap their vessel. Like, this will be revisited in the future, whether I get elected or not, because I'm not going to let this go. I'll be like a dog with a bone. But we should be bringing this to the table sooner rather than later, because there has been an awful lot of injustice foisted upon this industry. And being told by those people in front of you that they're going to look after you is nonsense. For 50 years, we've been abused in Europe, and our politicians have been there. So what's gone wrong? I don't blame Europe. I blame our politicians for not carrying the strong message that I will bring to Europe. And I'm not going to go over there and just bang the table. I'm going to put credible arguments in front of these people that they cannot deny. They said it. We've been told in all the utterances after Brexit that, oh, Ireland was badly treated and we need to look after them. But nothing's being done. So you have an open door from Europe to say that they're going to help you. They gave us 1.16 billion euros. What happened? Why is our minister and our government not giving us a fuel aid like the French and the Spanish? Why are all the other politicians that are in government not screaming at our minister? Why aren't they doing what they can do in our own country without saying we're going to go over to Europe and do it? Because they don't know how the system works. And they're doing nothing for you now. So please stop listening to the rhetoric and the nonsense that they're uttering. It's all false promises that they cannot and will not deliver. If you can't get your own minister at home to look after you in your own party, What's the point in getting it in Europe? We fought in Europe, or the organizations, to get Article 22 changed in the European Maritime Fisheries Fund, so that under mitigating circumstances, our industry and our minister could access funds to deal with them. Our minister chose not to do so. So where are those politicians? Why aren't they castigating our minister for not doing it? Never mind going to Europe telling them they already gave us the wherewithal to help our industry, but their own minister is doing nothing for us. So do you know what? It is absolute doublespeak out of both sides of their mouth, and it's about time the fishing industry put aside their allegiances to party politics and vote for somebody like me. And I'm not being shy about this, to send somebody to Europe that will genuinely fight for you and get results without question.
Yeah, Patrick, could you tell us a little bit about this just transition policy or just transition idea that the Europeans seem to have for the fishing industry?
Yeah, Oliver, again, this is touching back on what I touched on earlier about the NGOs trying to raise the price of taxation on our fuel, and that this would force us into a just transition phase. But I'm going to tell you about the hypocrisy of things like that. We've worked out that there is millions of litres of fuel being bought on our shoreline by foreign fleets that are fishing in our waters, taking away a greater share of our fish. So we have that carbon, and I don't know who's being allocated that footprint. Is it Ireland or is it those countries? So you can imagine we're trying to make our carbon targets that we've signed up to in the Kyoto Agreement, and Europe is saying if we don't meet them, we will be hit with massive fines. And imagine 2 million litres of diesel we estimate is being burned and bought by those vessels coming in and landing both all over the Cork coastline and the east coast into Dingle and Castletownbere. And these boats buy their fuel here. So this is another thing that I would be bringing to Europe that our MEPs are unaware of. Why? Because they say they do know about the industry, and they clearly do not. And the Green Party never mentioned this. So that's one part about just transition. I was told, now I can't verify these facts, that would probably keep our agricultural industry going for most of the year. So these are the things that are really going to have a huge impact. So the just transition needs to start on what's just, and then we'll start on the transition. Ireland has to be treated fairly, and the food producers of our country have to be treated. This is our heritage, these are our traditions, and they're being taken away from us. And our MEPs are not up to the task. They genuinely aren't, and none of the candidates that are running would have this conversation with you. Yet they're making promises that they're going to solve everything that comes their way. First of all, you have to know what the problem is before you can address it. And these people don't know the multiple problems that our industry is facing or the solutions that can be put in place to address them. So thanks for asking the question.
Patrick, why do you say that voters should not vote for the other candidates?
Well, Oliver, they're bringing in legislation that is going to harm our industry, like the Nature Restoration Bill. There's going to be huge consequences for that. They're bringing in MPAs, they're bringing in highly protected areas. That's going to put us out of business. They're bringing in other industries that are competing with us, like the offshore winds. But the worst thing is this: the MEPs that were in Brussels that we tried to get to stop giving away our fishing rights didn't listen to us. And as I said, we brought up the flotillas up to Cork and Dublin. It was on the posters. Don't give us compensation, give us our fish, allow us to make our living. And instead, those MEPs voted at the TCA deal that gave away 25% of our fish. So these people that are looking for the votes again already savaged the industry by agreeing to that. So they gave away 25% of our fish. We, as a result, had a decommissioning scheme that lost 40 boats. 40 families lost their livelihoods. Why would anybody in Ireland vote for people that did that to them, regardless? So that's why I say, look at what happened. Look at what these politicians have done to you. Forget about the promises to make things good. They have already damaged you. So if you had a living or a business and somebody took away 25% of your earnings and knocked on your door the following week and said, listen, I'm doing a great job for you in Europe, vote for me. It doesn't make sense. So I'm not asking for people to do something because I'm running for Europe. I'm asking you to think for a second and think why you're in the position you're in. And these people put you in that position. They voted for the TCA deal. I wouldn't have. I would have fought it tooth and nail, and I would have said to Europe, no way. And you know what I would have looked for? I would have looked for the socio-economic impact of this decision on Ireland's relative stability. They didn't. So this is why I say to you and everybody, these people harmed you. Why would you vote for somebody that harmed you, regardless of your political stance? These people did not look after you. That's why I'm saying on June the 7th, regardless you vote for me, don't vote for the people that destroyed you.
Food sovereignty is a major issue. You can hear them talking about it in France and Germany and the Netherlands, but we don't seem to have that concept here. We basically can't stand up to the food production requirements that the country needs.
But coming back to food security, we're branching into an area beyond the fishing industry. We're moving into the agricultural sector as well too, and they too now are under attack. And I'm told that 99% of the food and veg that we consume here, and potatoes and everything else, is imported into one of the greenest islands on the planet. It doesn't make any sense. There's no joined up thinking here. And fishing, of course, plays a massive role in that. We export most of our fish, but we do so because we have the boats to catch it. But the problem is that the boats that will be catching it in the future, I believe, will be flagship vessels. They won't be owned. There will be Irish vessels, but they won't be owned by the Irish. They'll be taken over the same as the UK was, the English side, not the Scots, but the English. And they were bought out. And I think when our industry becomes small enough to become sustainable for those people to buy it and without problems, they'll swoop in. And because there's no young people or no very few skippers or boat owners passing it on to their kids, they can't see a future in it. They don't want to put them through the same torture that they're going through. So it'll be bought by others that will. And that's what's happening. Look, we see boats being landed into all over coastline and no sign of a fishery officer because they have agreements to test or look at the fish when they go to the other countries. As I said, it's some miracle that a French boat landing into Ireland that goes on a boat that goes to Bilbao in Spain is suddenly going to be checked by a French authority in France. Like who's cutting who? We see the regulatory system for on food, right, to protect our oceans and stocks by our SFPA, bringing in systems that we are challenging that are not fit for purpose and actually contorts the legal requirements where you're falsifying your logbook. And that, they say that if you put a tanker of water and fish up on a weighing scale, the only allowance they'll make for that is 2% for water loss. Like this is madness. Like, so who would land into ports like this? This is all going to impact on our food security. Why? Because even if we do see other boats getting that fish, they won't land here. The processing sector will be gone. Brendan Byrne is saying this over and over again. He can, like I see, the devastation that's befalling our industry. This is all on the backdrop that Ireland has 12% of the fishing grounds. We have the richest waters in Europe. We know this because everybody wants to come here and fishing. And we only get 15% of our fishing rights. And I'm not saying this. I have it here in front of look. I don't know, can the picture pick it up, right? This is from the department. It's the fisheries fact sheet of May 2022. And the figures are there, all the landings and stuff like this. And I actually think they're missing it. It's shocking. 424,000 tons of fish, foreign landings from Irish waters. I don't think they're all calculated. And Irish landings from Irish waters is 105,000. Like, That's 500,000. We have 100,000 of that. 524,000. It's easy to do the sums. And that's not including fish that's not being recorded as being caught here and taken out, right? And look at all the boats that are just outside the 200-mile zone that are taking the likes of the blue whitings. It's incredible what's happening. We have to get real in our own country.
A blue whiting and bluefin tuna. There's a whole fleet of South Korean and Japanese fleets sitting out there, and yet and all, they come into our waters. They eat the valuable fish, the mackerel, the herring, whatever is in front of them, and there's no compensation for it.
No compensation.
Somebody else gets it.
Even those Japanese vessels now are coming in and landing again inside in our ports, and the diesel they're buying again is Japanese taking the hit on the carbon footprint of that, or is it Ireland? This is absolute madness of what's happening to our country. And we have our rights, but we're not looking to enforce our rights in Europe or anywhere else. And this is down to our political will. So, look, I'm going to put it to people like this watching this. You have a choice. You have the opportunity to send a message to government, to send a message to all political parties on June the 7th. I'm asking you to take that opportunity. Shake the political establishment. For the first time in 50 years, send a fisherman and small farmer to Europe to represent you. I'm putting myself forward for that reason. I've been there for the last 8 years. I can see what's going on, and I can't change it from the seat I'm in at the moment. But I know I can have an impact and certainly change things from the seat you could put me in after June the 7th.
Well, Patrick, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you do well in the election, and we will be following it closely.
Oliver, one thing I just want to say to you is that, yes, look, I appreciate you letting me to come on. I am really not happy with the coverage from our media. RTE and the political steering group for these elections decided that only candidates that had run before a significant amount of votes, or candidates who had a political history of being elected, were the ones to go onto the airwaves. So I appreciate this, that you allow me to come on. I'm hoping people who want this to go out nationwide, please share this. Please help Oliver to put the Fishing Daily into the public so that people can see what's happening to your industry on interviews like this. This is your opportunity now to share this far and wide, to finally get the message out where our media is not allowing you to be spoken to. Everybody knows it, that we don't get the proper coverage. We are 10 times our landmass in water. We are an industry that could provide billions into our exchequer. And I'll just put it to you simply like this. And this is not and cannot be challenged. If we got a fair share of our fish, if we doubled what we were getting to 30%, that would bring us up to €1 billion a year, according to BIM. We're at €500 million. That over 50 years is €50 billion. That is not an insignificant fund or fee or money into our country. But we need to tell people this, and that is 100% credible. I actually believe it would be a lot more, but let's stick with the minimum, an extra billion a year into our economy. That's what our industry could provide. And I think that's worth letting people know we are worth fighting for. As you said, our politicians don't believe we are. They only say it every time they come around to election time. It's time that we told the public, this is your resource. This is as good as the oil the Arabs have off their coastlines. Every other country in Europe would love to have the fishing grounds we have, and they're coming to our waters to take as much as they possibly can from our waters. And we are being decimated as a result. This, I feel, is a turning point, a crossroads in Irish politics and in our industry's history. If we don't act and do something now, we're going to lose more boats. And I don't think we're going to have a viable industry going forward in a number of years. We're going to be put out of business. But it's up to you. This is your time.
I said to the minister, I was chatting to him on Friday, last Friday, and I said to him, in 5 years' time, I don't see an inshore fishing industry. And that is the honest truth. I don't see it.
I'd say less. I'd say less, Oliver. I think from my own experience of the years that I'm inside, I've never seen it as bad.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any action, only talking. And look, people might say, well, you didn't do much for the inshore industry. I can categorically show you emails that I've been excluded from discussions when I tried to get in there with my own expertise and knowledge. I'm an inshore fisherman first and foremost, and I wanted to protect my industry. I have that proven in what I've done in the past with the V-notching programs. I'm not just saying this. I genuinely mean what I say. I am an honest broker. People might get me wrong, but that's up to them to come and talk to me, and I will explain to them, no problem, where I stand. And I've turned many a person's opinion of me the other way. I try and be fair with everybody. Everybody should have an opportunity to make a living from our sea. It's our resource, but our country could do with the money that's coming from that resource. They won't. You can't pull up like Dell or Pfizer's or anybody leave the country at the drop of a hat because there's better conditions somewhere else. Our fishing industry is there for us and our future generations if we look after it. It'll never go away. We shouldn't allow anybody else damage that resource or take from that resource too much. And I think that's why the common fishery policy has to be reviewed. And I give an example. Look at Seoul and 7F&G. When we see new boats coming in from Belgium, look at the impact that that has had on the scientific evaluation of that stock. And all that's changed is they're taking their full entitlements that they weren't taking before. We have around 3%, they have 70%. Now, if anybody can say that we don't have an argument there in Europe, they're cutting themselves.
Well, Patrick, best of luck now on Friday the 7th. And as I said, we'll be keeping a tight eye on it and fingers crossed and whatever, because we need somebody like yourself representing the industry.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and I appreciate the kind words that you've just